She walked into his salvage yard like she owned the waterfront and walked out believing he was nobody. She was wrong. Dead wrong. And by the time she understood just how badly she'd misjudged the man in the oil-stained coveralls, the truth he'd been carrying for 3 years was about to tear open a conspiracy that reached all the way to City Hall. This is the story of Ethan Cross, Navy captain, grieving father, and the last man standing between a corrupt developer and the waterfront his wife died protecting. Watch until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The salvage yard smelled like rust and salt water, and something older than either. The particular perfume of things that had been used hard and left to figure out what they were worth now. Ethan Cross had worked in that smell for 3 years. He'd stopped noticing it somewhere around the 6-month mark, the same way he'd stopped noticing the quiet in the house after Lily went to bed, or the empty side of the closet he still hadn't fully cleared out. Some things you didn't get used to. You just got numb in the right places and kept moving. It was a Tuesday in late October when Sophia Caldwell's car pulled through the front gate. Ethan was under the front axle of a decommissioned harbor tender, working a corroded fitting that had been fighting him for the better part of an hour. He heard the car, the low, expensive purr of an engine that didn't belong in a place like this, and registered it the way he registered most things that didn't require his immediate attention: noted, filed, returned to later. He had a fitting to get off. Hello? A woman's voice, clear, practiced, the kind of voice that expected to be answered. Ethan gave the wrench one more turn, felt something give, and slid out from under the tender. He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that wasn't going to make them any cleaner, and got his first look at Sophia Caldwell. She was standing about 10 feet away, wearing a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, dark trousers, heels that had no business being within a quarter mile of a gravel yard. She had a leather portfolio tucked under one arm and the expression of someone who had expected to be met at the gate. Dark hair pulled back, professional. Late 20s, maybe 30? She was looking at the salvage yard the way people looked at something they were already planning to categorize. Behind her, a black company SUV idled near the entrance. The driver hadn't gotten out. "Ethan Cross," she said. "That's me." She took in the coveralls, the grease, the rust stains, the fraying at the left knee where he'd caught it on a bolt last spring. He watched her do it. People usually weren't subtle about it. "Sophia Caldwell," she said, and offered her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm, practiced. She glanced at his palm before she let go, and he thought he caught something. Not quite disgust, but not far from it. Assessment. The kind you make when you've already decided what category something belongs in. "I have a 10 o'clock, she said. "I know." He tucked the rag into his back pocket. "Come on back to the office." The office was a converted shipping container at the rear of the yard. Insulated, heated in winter, cooled badly in summer, outfitted with a battered desk, 2 mismatched chairs, a filing cabinet, and a corkboard covered in work orders, and one drawing Lily had done of a blue whale that she'd insisted be displayed prominently. Ethan had tacked it up at eye level and left it there. Sophia's gaze went to the whale drawing when she sat down, then moved on. "Caldwell Marine Solutions," he said, settling into his chair. "Your assistant sent over the overview. Maritime salvage contracts, equipment reclamation. You're looking at a West Side waterfront operation." "That's correct." She opened the portfolio, produced a printed brief, slid it across the desk. "We've been evaluating several potential partners for a new regional contract. Your operation came up in our research." Ethan picked up the brief, flipped through it. "Solid company. Good reputation in commercial maritime work. The contract specs were real, and the numbers weren't insulting. He'd done his own research the night before, after Lily was in bed. Sophia Caldwell had taken her father's mid-sized vessel brokerage and turned it into a regional player in 6 years. She was sharp. The kind of sharp that came from actually knowing the work, not just managing people who did. He hadn't expected her to be this young. "Walk me through the reclamation scope," he said. She did. Efficiently, with real technical depth. She knew what she was talking about, or had been very well briefed by people who did. Ethan listened and asked questions, and the questions seemed to catch her slightly off guard. Not the questions of someone running a junkyard. She adjusted, answered them, moved on. But he could feel it. The gap between what she'd expected and what she was getting. The small recalibrations happening behind her eyes. The meeting ran 30 minutes. At the end, she gathered her materials, stood, and offered her hand again. "We'll be in touch," she said, and there was something in it, not quite dismissal, but close. The kind of thing you said when you were already mentally moving on to the next evaluation on your list. "Appreciate you coming out," Ethan said. He walked her back through the yard. She picked her way carefully over the gravel, avoiding a puddle, and he watched her reach the SUV and exchange a word with her driver. She didn't look back at the yard. The driver started the engine, and then, from the front gate, another vehicle turned in. A dark Navy-issue sedan, and behind it, a second one. Ethan stopped walking. Rear Admiral's insignia on the lead car. He recognized it before the vehicle came to a full stop. The driver got out first, opened the back door, and Rear Admiral James Hargrove stepped out onto the gravel in full dress uniform. He was 62, silver-haired, built like a man who'd spent his whole life on water, and had the particular stillness of someone who'd given hard orders and lived with what followed. Sophia Caldwell's driver had cut the engine. She was still standing beside the car. "Ethan." Hargrove crossed the yard with a stride that hadn't slowed much in the years since they'd last stood on a quarterdeck together. He extended his hand and gripped Ethan's the way you gripped a man's hand when you'd been through something together that didn't have a civilian equivalent. "Admiral?" Ethan kept his voice even. "Wasn't expecting you." "I know. I should have called." Hargrove's gaze moved briefly to Sophia, then back to Ethan. "There's a matter I needed to raise in person. The advisory board proposal. I wanted to make the case directly. We can talk inside." "In a minute." Hargrove looked at him steadily. "Captain." It wasn't a title Ethan used anymore. Hadn't. Not once. Not out loud. In 3 years. He heard it land in the yard like something dropped from a height. Sophia Caldwell hadn't moved. Hargrove turned, registered her presence the way senior officers registered civilians. Courteous. Complete. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met. Admiral James Hargrove, U.S. Navy, retired." Sophia stepped forward. "Sophia Caldwell. Caldwell Marine Solutions." "Caldwell." Hargrove nodded with recognition. "Good company. Your father built something real." He glanced at Ethan. "You two have business?" "Potential partnership," Sophia said. Her voice had shifted. Something in it that hadn't been there before. "Well?" Hargrove looked at Ethan with the particular expression of an old man who knew more than he was saying. "You'd be working with one of the finest officers this Navy produced in 20 years. Captain Cross commanded the USS Northbrook through the worst storm this coast has seen to generation. Lost communications, 2 engine casualties, 30-foot seas, brought every single one of his 212 crew members home." He paused. Every single one. The yard was very quiet. "He left the service to raise his daughter after his wife was killed. I've been trying to get him back in some capacity ever since." The old Admiral's voice didn't soften exactly. It wasn't that kind of voice, but something in it acknowledged weight. "He keeps telling me no." Sophia was looking at Ethan. Ethan was looking at the ground. There was a smear of grease on the gravel near his left boot that he focused on with the concentration of a man who needed somewhere to put his eyes. "Come on inside," he said to Hargrove finally. "I'll put coffee on." He walked back toward the office without looking at Sophia Caldwell again. She didn't leave right away. He could see her from the window, the small square of dirty glass beside the corkboard, standing beside her SUV for a long moment after Hargrove and his aide had gone inside. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. She was just standing there with her portfolio under her arm and the October wind pushing at her hair. Then she got in the car and the SUV pulled out through the gate. Hargrove was sitting in the chair she'd left, holding a mug of coffee that Ethan had produced from the ancient machine in the corner. The aide had stayed outside. "You could have called," Ethan said, settling back into his chair. "I could have." Hargrove wrapped both hands around the mug. Felt like the kind of conversation that shouldn't happen on the phone. "The answer is still no." "I haven't asked the question yet. You said advisory board." I said advisory board proposal. Hargrove set the mug down. The proposal has changed since we spoke in August. This isn't a desk assignment, Ethan. It's field adjacent, maritime incident analysis. You'd be working with active crews, not paper pushers. 2 weeks a month, flex schedule. Your daughter's what, 8 now? 8 in December. School schedule is manageable. My schedule is manageable now. That's the point. Hargrove looked at him for a long moment, not pushing, just looking, with the patience of a man who'd learned that some conversations needed silence more than they needed words. The Northbrook crew asks about you, he said finally. Petty Officer Delgado made chief last spring, asked me to tell you personally. Something moved through Ethan's chest. He let it. Tell her congratulations from me. Tell her yourself. James? I know. The Admiral picked up the mug again. I know. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the whale drawing on the corkboard. She draw that? About 6 months after. Ethan glanced at it. She was going through a phase, wanted to know everything about whales. Had me read her 3 books about them. Hargrove smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that lived mostly in the eyes. She looks like Amelia. Yeah. Ethan's voice was level, practiced level. She does. The wind came off the river and moved through the gaps in the shipping container walls the way it always did. Somewhere in the yard, a piece of metal shifted and settled. The sounds of the place, his place, the place he'd built from almost nothing in the first terrible year after, arranged themselves around the silence between the 2 men. Leave the proposal, Ethan said. I'll read it. That's all I'm asking. Okay. Lily got out of the school bus at 3:47, which was 4 minutes later than usual because of a traffic delay on Millbrook Road, which she reported to Ethan in precise detail the moment she came through the salvage yard gate, still wearing her backpack and the yellow rain jacket that was now 2 sizes too small, but that she refused to give up. And then Mrs. Calloway said the bus driver should have taken the alternate route, but the alternate route has construction, so that didn't make sense, Lily concluded, setting her backpack on the desk and beginning the serious business of unzipping it. Did anything happen here today? Had a couple of visitors. What kind? Business. And Admiral Hargrove. Lily looked up from the backpack. She had her mother's eyes, the particular dark brown that caught light differently depending on the angle, the kind of eyes that were always doing more thinking than the expression around them suggested. The old Navy man? That's the one. Did he bring cookies again? He did not. She considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old philosopher. He should plan better. She produced her reading log from the backpack and set it on the desk. Can I do homework out in the yard? As long as you stay away from the eastern stack. I've got unstable material over there. You always have unstable material over there. Hence the rule. She gathered her reading log, a pencil, and, after a moment's consideration, a small plastic container of crackers from her jacket pocket, and headed back out through the door. Ethan watched her go, the yellow jacket disappearing around the edge of the container. He sat for a moment in the quiet. The folder from Hargrove was on the corner of the desk. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he pulled up the email from Sophia Caldwell's assistant that had come in at noon, the original partnership inquiry that had brought her here, and read it again, this time thinking about the expression on her face when Hargrove had spoken. The moment when something behind her eyes had shifted. He'd seen that look before. Not often, but enough. The look of someone updating information they'd already filed. He closed the email. He wasn't sure what he wanted to come of this. The honest answer was that he wasn't sure he had enough bandwidth to want things in a direction that complicated. The salvage operation was finally stable. Not lucrative, not by a long shot, but stable. Lily was okay. She was more than okay most days. She was Lily. And whatever he'd built here, in this rusted, improbable corner of the waterfront, was built on the foundation of everything else being exactly as simple as he could make it. He picked up the wrench he'd left on the edge of the desk and turned it in his hands. Simple didn't mean nothing was moving under the surface. He knew that. He'd known that for longer than he'd been willing to examine directly. He put the wrench down, stood up, and went to check on his daughter. She was sitting on the hull of an old tugboat that lived in the rear corner of the yard, too rusted to be worth reclaiming, too solid to haul for scrap, and therefore promoted over time to the status of unofficial furniture. Lily had discovered it in her first year in the yard and claimed it immediately. She'd named it the Patience, which she said was a good name for a boat, and Ethan had not argued. She was reading with the cracker container open beside her, the reading log propped on her knees. The afternoon light came in low and sideways through the gap in the yard's rear fence, the fence that bordered the riverbank, and it caught the red in her hair and turned it almost copper. Ethan sat on a salvage crate nearby, far enough to give her space, close enough to be there. "Dad," Lily said, without looking up from her book. "Yeah." "The lady who was here this morning." She turned a page. "Was she nice?" He thought about it. "She was professional." Lily glanced up. The distinction between those two things was apparently worth examining. "What's the difference?" "Nice is how someone makes you feel. Professional is how someone does their job." "Can't someone be both?" "Sure. She might be." Lily went back to her book. "She dropped her pen by the gate," she said. "When she was leaving, I picked it up. It's a nice pen. Should I give it back?" "Where is it?" "My pocket." "When she comes back, you can give it back to her." Lily nodded with the seriousness of someone who took the stewardship of found pens very seriously. "Okay." The river made its river sounds beyond the fence. Somewhere downstream, a barge was moving. Ethan could hear the low throb of the engine, faint enough to be almost imagined. "Dad!" Lily again, this time with a different weight to it. "Yeah, Bug. Do you think Mom would have liked the yard?" He didn't answer immediately. The question lived in the category of questions that deserved more than a fast answer. "I think she would have complained about the smell," he said finally, "and then found something in it to love." Lily smiled at her book. "That sounds like her." "Yeah." Ethan looked at the fence, the light dying in the gap, the river moving somewhere beyond. "It does." No. 2 days later, Sophia Caldwell came back. She wasn't wearing heels this time. Sensible boots, dark jeans, a jacket that was still too clean for a salvage yard but was clearly an attempt at pragmatism. She came through the gate at 9 in the morning, and Ethan, who was loading scrap on the east side, saw her before she saw him. He watched her for a moment. She was looking around the yard with a different expression than the first time. Not assessing, something closer to curious. "Ms. Caldwell." She turned, found him. "Mr. Cross." A beat. "I should have called first, I'm sorry." "It's all right." He set down the piece he was carrying. "What do you need?" She looked at him with the directness he was starting to understand was probably just how she was. Not aggressive, just unwilling to do the thing where you circled around the actual point. "I owe you an apology," she said, "from the other day." "You don't." "I do." She wasn't backing down from it. "I made a judgment about you the moment I walked in here, before we'd spoken 10 words. That was unprofessional, and I'm aware that it was also wrong." Ethan studied her. The apology was real. No performance in it, no angle he could identify. Just a person who'd done something she wasn't happy about and was trying to correct the record. "Apology accepted," he said. "I'd like to continue the conversation about the partnership, if you're open to it. The 10 o'clock meeting gave me most of what I needed. You had follow-up questions in the brief you sent to my office." He had. 3 technical questions about the reclamation scope, sent through her assistant at 7 the previous morning. He was mildly surprised she was referencing them directly. "You read them?" "I answered them myself." She reached into her jacket and produced a folded sheet. "I thought that was more useful than having my team put together a packet." He took the sheet, read it. The answers were direct, accurate, and showed real understanding of the operational specifics. Not summary level, working level. "You know the hardware," he said. "My father made sure of it." Something in her voice when she said it, not quite grief, but something adjacent. Past tense and present tense, living uncomfortably together. "I spent 3 summers on reclamation vessels when I was a teenager." He thought running the company meant understanding every part of it. Smart man. He was. Ethan folded the paper, put it in his jacket pocket. "Walk with me. I'll show you the Eastern inventory while we talk." She walked with him. And something about the way she moved through the yard, not cautiously now, but paying attention, stopping to look at things, asking questions that weren't performative, shifted something in Ethan's assessment of her. She wasn't here to check a box. She was here because something had changed, and she was doing the work of understanding it. He still didn't fully trust it. He had learned the hard way that people could be two things at once: professionally excellent and personally capable of enormous carelessness. He'd met enough of both in the Navy to know the combination was more common than people thought, but he was willing to keep walking. At the far edge of the eastern inventory, near the back fence, Lily had set up an unofficial collection station on top of a flat piece of old hull plating, shells, mostly, gathered from the riverbank, arranged in patterns that meant something to her. 3 or 4 feathers, a piece of driftwood shaped like a question mark. Sophia stopped. "Whose is this?" she asked. "My daughter's." Sophia looked at the arrangement for a moment. The shells were small and brown, river shells, not the impressive kind. The feathers were ordinary, but the arrangement had care in it. Someone had thought about where each thing went. "How old is she?" 8, almost. "I used to collect rocks," Sophia said. "When I was about that age, drove my mother insane." She paused. "She's in school?" "Till 3:45. Sophia nodded. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the shells. Then she picked up her pace again, back toward the main yard, and the conversation returned to business. But Ethan noticed that she'd been careful to step around the shell arrangement when she moved on. The partnership conversation continued through the morning, moving in and out of the office, around the yard, punctuated by the normal work of the salvage operation. Ethan had 3 other employees, and the work didn't stop for meetings. Sophia adapted without complaint, holding her portfolio and waiting while he signed off on a delivery receipt, picking up the conversation exactly where it had left off when he returned. By noon, they had the rough shape of an agreement. By 12:30, Ethan had made sandwiches from the kitchen in the corner of the office and offered her one, and she'd taken it without any of the hesitation that might have accompanied the gesture in a different version of this relationship. "Your instinct about the Western Basin inventory is right," she said, eating and reading his handwritten notes at the same time. "The displacement calculations on the number 3 hold are off. I can have my head of logistics take a second look. Or I can send you the original survey, and you can have him work from that. Even better." She glanced up from the notes. He was looking at the window, the dirty square of glass that looked out over the yard. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can try." "Why the salvage yard? After the Navy?" It was the first personal question she'd asked, and she asked it straight, without dressing it up. He respected that. "I needed work I could do on my own schedule," he said. "Work Lily could come to. Work that wasn't going to send me somewhere I couldn't come back from on short notice." He ate a bite of his sandwich. "My wife and I had talked about the waterfront for a long time, before. She grew up near water. Thought there was something in the salvage side of it, taking things that were worn out and finding out what they still had in them." He paused. Seemed like a reasonable inheritance. Sophia was quiet. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She looked back at the notes. "That's a good reason." He was moving a section of steel grating on the south side of the yard when he found the survey marker. It was a small orange flag on a wire stake, the kind used by land surveyors, pushed into the soft ground near his property boundary. He almost missed it. It had been planted close to the base of the perimeter fence, mostly obscured by a growth of weeds. He crouched down and looked at it. There was no reason for a survey marker to be on his property without his knowledge. He owned the land outright, had bought it during the first year, scraped together everything he had, and taken on a manageable loan that was almost paid off. No pending easements, no outstanding permits, nothing that should have triggered a survey. He pulled the stake, stood up, and looked at the fence line. There was a second marker, about 30 feet down. Same type, same orange flag. He walked the length of the south boundary and found 4 total. Ethan Cross had not spent 20 years navigating complex operational situations by ignoring things that didn't fit the picture. He took photos of each marker on his phone, replaced them where he'd found them, and went back to the office. Spent an hour on the county assessor's website, checking permits, checking filings. Found nothing unusual. Spent another 20 minutes running a search on development proposals for the waterfront district. and found, buried in the commercial filing section of the City Planning Office website, a rezoning proposal, preliminary, not yet on the public agenda, for a stretch of waterfront property that, if he was reading the boundaries correctly, included his salvage yard. The filing entity was listed as a company called Harborview Development LLC. He'd never heard of it. He wrote the name down. That night, after Lily was in bed, she'd made him read 2 chapters of a book about dolphins, which she was entering as part of her current marine mammals phase. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and 2 hours to think. Harborview Development LLC had been registered 18 months ago. Delaware Incorporation, which told him exactly nothing useful. The registered agent was a law firm in the city, mid-size corporate work. The firm's website was professionally bland. He searched the names associated with the firm. Found the firm's listed clients in public records. Found, eventually, the name of the man who'd given the initial quote for the rezoning proposal to the city planning newsletter he'd unearthed. Victor Langston. He knew the name. Not personally, but the name was the kind of name that had a shape in the city's commercial landscape. Langston Capital. Waterfront development projects in 2 neighboring districts over the past decade. The kind of money that moved quietly through city politics, that had its name on charitable committees and infrastructure funds and the edges of things that other names tended not to be on. Ethan Cross had learned in the Navy that there were 2 kinds of threats, the ones that came at you head-on and the ones that came from underneath. The kind underneath was the one that killed you. He closed the laptop, sat in the kitchen quiet. The house, the small house he rented 2 blocks from the yard, chosen specifically for the direct walking route so he could get to Lily's school inside of 15 minutes if he had to, was dark except for the kitchen light and the small night light in the hallway that Lily had picked out, shaped like a starfish. He thought about the conversation with Hargrove, the advisory role. He thought about the shell arrangement on the hull plate, the small careful patterns Lily made of the things she found. He thought about the survey markers in his fence line and the name on the development filing, and the 18 months of quiet preparation that had apparently been happening in the background of his ordinary life without his knowledge. He got up, rinsed his coffee cup, and turned out the kitchen light. Tomorrow, he would start making calls. The first call was to his lawyer, a former JAG officer named Patricia Osai, who'd moved to civilian practice and had helped him with the property acquisition 3 years ago. He reached her voicemail and left a specific message: survey markers, property boundary, development filings. He needed a real estate conversation soon. The second call, he hesitated over longer. Sophia Caldwell answered on the 3rd ring. It was 8:15 in the morning. She sounded like someone who'd already been working for 2 hours. Cross, she said, and the way she said it, short, not unfriendly, told him something about how their 2 days of conversation had recalibrated her internal file on him. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need a straight answer. A pause. All right. Your company's been operating on this waterfront for 11 years. Then you know the development landscape here better than I do. Victor Langston. A longer pause. What about him? Her voice had shifted slightly, not defensive, careful. You know him. I know of him. We've interacted in professional contexts. She paused again. Is there a specific question in here? Are you aware of any development interest he has in the Western Waterfront District? The silence this time was 4 or 5 seconds, which was a different kind of silence than the previous ones. Why? Because I found survey markers on my property boundary that I didn't authorize, and his name is attached to a preliminary rezoning proposal that covers my land. She was quiet for a moment. How preliminary? She asked. Not on the public agenda yet, but it's filed. Another pause. I'll make some calls, she said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Her voice was level and direct in the way he was starting to recognize as characteristic. But if Victor Langston is making moves on the Western District, that affects Caldwell Marine as much as it affects you. This waterfront is my operating territory. I need to know what's on it. He thought about it. All right, let me know what you find. I'll call you this afternoon. She did. What she found was the beginning of something much larger and much older than either of them had walked into expecting. But that was an afternoon conversation, and this was still morning, and Ethan Cross had a salvage yard to run. He went back out to the yard, picked up where he'd left off, and let the work do what it had always done for him. Clear the noise down to something manageable, something honest, something he could put his hands on. The river moved beyond the fence. The gulls made their noise. He worked, and he waited, and he kept his eyes open. Sophia called back at 2:17 in the afternoon, earlier than he'd expected. "Where are you?" she asked. "Office." "I'm coming over." She didn't wait for him to respond. The line went dead. Ethan looked at the phone for a second, then set it on the desk and went back to the inventory spreadsheet he'd been working on. Whatever she'd found, it would land the same whether he sat here worrying about it or finished the column he was halfway through. She arrived 22 minutes later. This time she came through the gate fast, no hesitation, the professional composure of the first visit entirely replaced by something more directed. She was carrying a manila folder and her phone, and she'd apparently been on a call in the car because she was still finishing a sentence when she pushed the office door open. "No, I'll handle it from here. Yes, I'll call you back." She hung up, looked at Ethan, and put the folder on his desk. "Sit down." "It's my office." "Then sit down in your own office." She wasn't being aggressive. She was being the kind of focus that didn't have much room for social niceties, and Ethan recognized it because he'd been that way himself in operational planning sessions, a lifetime ago. He sat. She sat across from him and opened the folder. "Victor Langston has been acquiring waterfront properties in this district for 3 years, she said. "Not directly. Through a network of at least 4 shell companies. Harborview Development is the one you found, but there are others. I had my legal team spend this morning pulling public filings, and what they found is that these companies have been buying up parcels in sequence, always through intermediaries, always with at least 2 legal entities between Langston's name and the actual transaction. Why does he need that much separation? Because at least 2 of the parcels he acquired were subject to historic preservation review processes that he circumvented, and one was under a waterfront commercial protection designation that should have prevented the sale." She tapped the folder. "My people found a zoning board decision from 14 months ago that approved a reclassification of that parcel. 3 of the 5 board members who voted for it have since received significant donations to their respective re-election campaigns from a civic foundation that traces back to Koa. Guess who? Langston. Through one more company, yes." She sat back. "This is not a man who makes casual investments. This is someone who has been systematically building towards something on this waterfront for years. And your property, your specific parcel, sits directly between 2 other properties he already controls." Ethan looked at the folder, then at her. "You put this together in one morning," he said. "I had help, and I had motivation." She met his eyes. "I told you this district is my operating territory. Caldwell Marine has warehouse space 2 blocks east of your yard. If Langston gets rezoning approval and starts building, the traffic and access changes alone could compromise our logistics operation." She paused. "But that's not the only reason I made the calls." He didn't push her on what the other reason was. He could see it, and he thought she knew he could, and neither of them needed to name it in order for it to be real. "How far along is the rezoning proposal?" he asked. "It's not on the public agenda yet, but my contact at the planning office says it's been submitted for preliminary review, which means it could move to the public agenda within 60 days, depending on how fast Langston is pushing." She tapped the folder again. "There's a city council hearing on waterfront commercial development scheduled for next month. It's ostensibly about a different project, but my contact says there's been pressure from Langston's people to broaden the scope. If they manage that, the Western District rezoning could get folded in. How much political capital does he have?" "Enough." Something moved across her face. Not quite disgust, but in the neighborhood. "He's been building relationships on the city council for years, the same way he builds everything else, quietly, through layers, until by the time anyone notices, he's woven into the fabric of things." Ethan was quiet for a moment. The river wind moved along the outside of the container walls, the familiar groan of the metal expanding and contracting in the afternoon temperature shift. "Why your property specifically?" she asked. "Do you know?" He'd been thinking about that. "The waterfront access," he said slowly. "My parcel is the only one on this stretch with direct deep water berth access. The properties on either side have it, but they're bottlenecked. Mine has 2 separate access points. He looked at the map she'd included in the folder, ran his finger along the property lines. If you're trying to develop a major maritime commercial facility on this strip, you need what my land gives you. Without it, the whole project has an operational problem. Which is why he needs the land, not just wants it. She said it quietly, like she was completing a calculation. Which is why he needs it. They sat with that for a moment. There's something else, Sophia said, and something in the way she said it made him look up from the map. Her voice had shifted. The operational focus was still there, but there was something underneath it, something careful. When I was making calls this morning, I talked to a maritime attorney I know. She does a lot of work with Navy contractors. I mentioned the Western District, Langston's name, your property. She got very quiet. Sophia looked at him steadily. She asked me if I knew about the Meridian inquiry. Ethan went still. Sophia watched his face. You know what that is. He didn't answer immediately. The name sat in the office between them, in the sound of the wind, in the particular quality of afternoon light through the dirty window. He'd heard that name in a federal hearing room 3 years ago. He'd heard it in the hospital 2 days before he'd heard it in the hearing room when Amelia was still there, but barely. He'd heard it in a conversation with a JAG lawyer at his kitchen table while Lily slept, 6 years old and mercifully unaware of the particular machinery of adult catastrophe. The Meridian was a Navy transport helicopter, he said. It went down on the coast 8 miles north of here, 3 years ago March. 5 people were killed. My wife was one of them. Sophia didn't speak. The official inquiry found mechanical failure due to inadequate maintenance, he continued. His voice was flat and even. Not because he didn't feel it. He could feel it like a low electrical current, the way he always did when this came up. But because he'd learned the hard way that the flat voice was the only one he trusted in this territory. The inquiry was closed. The contractor responsible for the maintenance was a company called Maritime Service and Logistics Group. They were fined, license suspended for 2 years. He paused. They reopened under a new name 14 months later. What was the new name? He looked at her. She already knew. He could see it in the set of her mouth, the stillness of her hands on the folder. Harborview Marine, she said softly. Harborview Marine. He said it out loud because saying it out loud made it real in a way that the knowledge sitting in his own head never quite managed. Which, according to your legal team's research this morning, shares a registered agent with Harborview Development LLC. She said it with a quiet completeness, like a door closing. The office was very quiet for a long moment. The attorney you spoke to, Ethan said. Why did she know to ask about the Meridian inquiry when you mentioned Langston? Sophia opened the folder to a different page. Because Victor Langston sat on the board of directors of Maritime Service and Logistics Group from its founding until it was dissolved. That's a matter of public record, buried in a commercial filing database that nobody has any particular reason to look at. She pushed the page across the desk. Langston wasn't just connected to the helicopter crash that killed your wife, Ethan. He was one of the people responsible for the company that caused it. Ethan looked at the page. The lines of text were clear and precise. A board of directors listing, a date of dissolution, a name that had been sitting at the intersection of 2 disasters for 3 years without anyone connecting the coordinates. He'd been looking at this from the wrong direction. He'd been asking why Langston wanted his land. He should have been asking why Langston was interested in this particular man's land in this particular spot. He picked up the page, read it again, put it down. He knows who I am, Ethan said. Almost certainly. He knows what I know about the Meridian inquiry. What do you know? She asked carefully. What do you know that isn't already in the official record? He looked at her. She held his gaze, and he read her face, the real attention in it, the absence of pretense. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was asking because she understood that the answer was the shape of the whole thing. The official inquiry found mechanical failure, he said. Inadequate maintenance, which was true as far as it went. He leaned forward slightly. What the inquiry didn't address, what I reported in a supplementary statement that was acknowledged and then quietly filed without follow-up, was that the maintenance records for the Meridian had been altered. The logs that should have shown a known hydraulic issue in the main rotor assembly had been corrected, filed over. The original entries were gone. He paused. I knew about the hydraulic issue because Amelia had told me. She'd flagged it to her commanding officer 2 weeks before the crash. I had a text message from her. 3 text messages, actually, documenting what she'd reported and when. Sophia was watching him with absolute stillness. I gave those messages to the JAG investigator, he said. They were included in my supplementary statement. The investigator noted them. The inquiry board reviewed them. He stopped. And then the inquiry was closed with a finding of inadequate maintenance, no criminal referral, no further investigation into the altered records. Why? Sophia said. Why was it closed? At the time, I was told the evidence wasn't sufficient to establish intent behind the record alteration. Clerical error was the phrasing. His voice stayed flat. He'd had 3 years to find the flat place in all of this. I was also told by the JAG lawyer who was advising me that pursuing it further would be a very long process, and I had a 6-year-old daughter to raise. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, opened them. What I understand now, Ethan said, that I didn't fully understand then, because I was exhausted and I was grieving and I was trying to get Lily through every single day without her mother, is that someone managed that inquiry's outcome. He looked at the board listing on the desk. And that someone had a reason to need that outcome managed. Because if the record alteration was traced, it wouldn't stop at the maintenance contractor. It would follow the money. It would follow the decision-making. It would follow the reason why a known safety issue was documented, reported to a commanding officer, and then covered up instead of fixed. He sat back. The Meridian was running a specific route on a specific day. That route took it over a stretch of coastline where Langston had a development interest that required a certain federal access restriction to be lifted. The restriction couldn't be lifted while a specific naval operations protocol was active. The protocol required a specific senior officer to sign off on any modification. He stopped. One of the people killed in the crash was that officer. The silence in the office was a different quality now, not just quiet, dense, like the air before a storm. You're saying the crash wasn't just negligence, Sophia said. I'm saying I don't know what it was, Ethan said carefully. I'm saying the coincidences are numerous and specific. I'm saying I buried the knowledge of those coincidences for 3 years because I had a daughter to raise. And because I didn't have proof. And because the system that should have followed up on my supplementary statement didn't follow up on it. He looked at the folder on the desk. I'm saying that Victor Langston building a case to seize my property is an interesting thing to be happening right now, given everything else. Sophia sat very still. He's cleaning up, she said quietly. Or trying to. That's one interpretation. Is there another one that makes as much sense? He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. She looked at him for a long moment. What are you going to do? Right now? I'm going to pick up my daughter from school at 3:45. He said it without particular emphasis. Just fact. After that, I'm going to call my lawyer and I'm going to call Admiral Hargrove. He gathered the pages back into the folder, closed it. What I'm not going to do is move fast before I understand what I'm actually standing on. That's... She stopped herself. What? I was going to say that's smart, she said. But what I actually meant is that it must cost something. To have known all that and kept it contained. He looked at her. It was a real observation, not a probe. The kind of thing a person said when they'd been sitting across from someone for long enough to actually see them. It cost quite a bit, he said evenly. She nodded once, didn't push. He stood up, and she followed the cue, gathering her things. At the door she paused, hand on the frame. The partnership, she said. I want to move forward with it, if you're still open to it. For the record, that has nothing to do with any of this. He considered her. I know. Okay. She stepped out, then turned back one more time. Her expression had shifted, still direct, but something in it that hadn't been there in the first visit, something less armored. I'm sorry about your wife, she said. I should have said that earlier, and I didn't. It's all right. It isn't, actually. But I'll take you saying it is. She held his gaze for a second longer, then walked out into the yard. He stood in the doorway and watched her go. From the south end of the yard, the tugboat hull was visible, The Patience, Lily's boat, sitting where it always sat. The shell collection was still on the hull plate. He could see the arrangement from here, the careful patterns of small found things. He went to get his keys. He had 12 minutes before the school bus. Lily was quiet on this walk home, which was not her default state. She walked beside him with her hands in her jacket pockets and her eyes tracking something in the middle distance that wasn't actually there, the expression she got when she was processing something. He let her process. They were half a block from the house when she said, "Kira said her dad is buying a boat." "What kind of boat?" "A small one, for fishing. She said he's going to teach her." She was quiet for another few steps. "Do you think we'll ever have a boat?" "We work in a salvage yard. We're surrounded by boats." "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She thought about this. "I don't really want a boat," she said. "I just wanted to see what you'd say." He looked at her sideways. "Is that so? You always say things that are true but aren't really the answer." She said this without accusation, the way she might describe a feature of the landscape. "Mom used to say you were a lateral thinker." He felt the familiar catch in his chest, the split-second recalibration that still happened, 3 years on, when Lily referenced her mother in the casual present tense of memory. Not grief exactly, more like the experience of a healed fracture when the weather changed. A reminder of what had happened and what hadn't. "Your mom was right," he said. "She usually was." Lily said it comfortably, and that comfort, the ease with which she held the past, was the thing he'd worked the hardest to preserve for her. The space in which Amelia could be talked about normally, referenced easily, woven into ordinary conversation without ceremony or weight. He'd not always managed it. There were still bad weeks, still nights when the absence had a pressure to it that made the house feel smaller than it was. But Lily could say Mom used to say without bracing, and that, he thought, was real. "Sophia left her pen here," Lily said, with a subject change that was pure Lily. No segue, no transition, just a pivot to whatever was next in her head. "I know, she'll come back for it. I put it on your desk so it doesn't get lost." "Thank you." "She seems like she's trying," Lily said. He glanced down at her. "What does that mean?" "I don't know exactly." She frowned, working it out. "Like, she's not comfortable here, but she's trying to be, instead of just waiting for it to be over. Some grown-ups just wait for things to be over." He thought about that as they turned up the front walk. Sophia Caldwell, stepping carefully around the shell arrangement on the hull plate. Sophia Caldwell, showing up with boots instead of heels. Sophia Caldwell, saying I should have said that earlier, and I didn't. "Yeah," he said. "I think you're right." Lily nodded, satisfied with this confirmation, and ran up the porch steps ahead of him. Moshim. The call with Patricia Osei happened at 7. After dinner, while Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table and Ethan had moved to the back porch with the folder and his phone and a cup of coffee going cold in his other hand. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he valued about her. She waited until he'd laid out the full picture, the survey markers, the shell companies, the Meridian connection, Langston's board membership, before she said anything. "How solid is the connection between Maritime Service and Logistics Group and Harborview Development?" she asked. "Shared registered agent, same law firm handling both." He paused. "I can get you the filings." "Send them tonight." He heard her writing. "The survey markers are a property violation regardless of anything else. I can file a cease and desist on that tomorrow. It won't stop anything, but it creates a paper trail, and it notifies Langston that you're paying attention." She paused. "The Meridian material is more complicated." "I know." "Ethan." Her voice took on a different register. "If what you're describing is accurate, if someone with political and financial reach had a hand in suppressing the original inquiry, then bringing this back into the open is going to require more than a cease and desist and a zoning board objection." "I know that too." "What does Hargrove say?" "I'm calling him after you." She was quiet for a moment. "The supplementary statement you filed with JAG. You have a copy?" "Saved in 3 places." "The text messages from your wife?" "Yes." "Good." Another pause, the quiet of someone thinking through a sequence. "There's a federal protection for individuals who report suppressed evidence in military accident inquiries. It's not widely known, and it's not easy to invoke, but it exists. If the supplementary statement was actively sidelined rather than simply deprioritized, that's a different legal landscape than negligence. He stood up from the porch steps, moved to the railing. The night was clear and cold, and the river was a dark line in the distance, catching the lights from the far bank. "I wasn't planning to move on this tonight," he said. "I need to understand what I'm standing on first." "Right. But Ethan, the rezoning hearing is coming. If Langston gets that on the public agenda, the timeline compresses." She let that sit for a second. "He's moved first. That means you're playing response right now, not initiative." "I understand that. Just making sure." He called Hargrove at 8. The Admiral answered on the second ring, the way he always did, no matter the hour, as if someone with his history had learned that calls coming in at odd times deserved to be answered. Ethan laid it out, same way he'd done with Patricia, complete, in sequence, without editorializing. When he finished, Hargrove was quiet for long enough that Ethan checked his phone to see if the call had dropped. "Still here," Hargrove said, "thinking. Take your time." "The Meridian," the Admiral said finally, with a weight in it that carried things Ethan couldn't fully see. "I had concerns about that inquiry at the time. I raised them through channels. I was told the review was complete." He stopped. "I should have pushed harder." "You didn't know what you didn't know," Ethan said. "That's a generous interpretation." "It's the accurate one." Another pause. "The advisory role I've been proposing," Hargrove said. "It has institutional access. If there's a case to be made that the Meridian inquiry was improperly concluded, and it sounds like there may be, that kind of access has value." "I'm aware." "Is that a yes?" Ethan looked at the river, the cold air on his face, the sound of the city at night, the kitchen light coming through the glass behind him where Lily was still at her homework. "It's not a no," he said. Hargrove made a sound that was almost but not quite a laugh, the closest the man usually got to one. "I'll take it." Over the next 10 days, Sophia came to the yard regularly, and the visits had stopped being purely about the partnership, though the partnership was always part of it. She would arrive in the morning, spend time with Ethan going over the operational details of the reclamation contract, and then the conversation would shift gradually to the Langston material, the filings, the pieces that were slowly arranging themselves into a coherent picture. She had a quality Ethan hadn't expected. She did not make the investigation about herself. She contributed what she had: her contacts, her legal team's research, her knowledge of the district's commercial landscape, and then she stepped back. She didn't narrate her own involvement. She didn't require acknowledgement of it. He noticed this the same way he'd noticed her stepping around Lily's shells, not with fanfare, just as a fact about her that he was accumulating. Lily noticed her more directly. On the third visit, she emerged from behind the patients with a fistful of river shells and presented them to Sophia with the seriousness of someone offering a gift that had weight. Sophia took them with equal seriousness, examined each one, asked which was Lily's favorite. Lily explained the hierarchy of her shell collection in considerable detail. Ethan watched from a distance and did not interrupt. On the fifth visit, Lily had placed a single blue-gray shell on the corner of Ethan's desk with a note beside it in her careful handwriting. "For Sophia, if she wants it." Ethan left it there. When Sophia arrived and saw it, she read the note, picked up the shell, and put it in her jacket pocket without saying anything about it to him. He was glad she didn't make a thing of it. The work continued. The yard ran. Lily went to school and came home and made her collections, and read her marine mammals books, and asked questions about dolphins and occasionally about Sophia's pen, which she had apparently appointed herself the permanent guardian of, and which she produced at the end of each visit to make sure it went home with the right person. And underneath all of it, the shape of what Victor Langston had built, and what he had buried, was slowly becoming visible. Patricia filed the cease and desist on the survey markers. 3 days later, Ethan received a letter from a law firm he didn't recognize, asserting that the markers had been placed in error and would be removed. They were removed that afternoon. The efficiency of it told him something. So did the tone of the letter. Careful, not aggressive. Langston knew he was paying attention. He hadn't yet decided how to respond to that. Hargrove moved quietly through the institutional channels he had access to and sent Ethan a brief message 10 days after their phone call. Found the supplementary statement. It was filed, it was reviewed, it was noted as inconclusive by the inquiry board chair. The board chair retired 6 months after the inquiry closed. He now consults for a firm that shares office space with Langston Capital's legal advisors. Ethan read that message sitting in his office at the end of a long afternoon, with the yard going quiet around him and the river light going gold through the fence gap. He read it twice. Then he set the phone down, rubbed his face with both hands, and sat for a moment in the particular kind of quiet that came when something you'd half known for a long time finally arranged itself into a shape you could see clearly. He wasn't ready. He was closer to ready than he'd been that morning. He picked up the phone and sent a message to Sophia. "Can you come in tomorrow morning? I need to show you something." Her response came in under 2 minutes. "I'll be there at 8. He put the phone in his pocket and went to find Lily, who was on the Patience in the last of the afternoon light, adding to her collection, completely absorbed in the small and serious work of a child, arranging the beautiful things the world had given her. He sat on the crate nearby and watched her, and let the anger he was carrying, the slow, careful, long-kept anger, stay exactly where it was, patient as the old boat, ready for when it was needed. Sophia arrived at 8 on the dot, and Ethan had already been in the office for an hour. He'd spent the early morning pulling everything together. The supplementary statement he'd filed with JAG, scanned and saved, the text messages from Amelia printed and dated, the shell company filings Patricia's team had assembled, Hargrove's message about the inquiry board chair, and a timeline he'd built himself on 4 sheets of paper taped together and spread across the desk. 3 years of separate fragments, arranged now into a sequence that was impossible to look at without understanding what it meant. Sophia came through the door, saw the spread on the desk, and didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked. "Coffee's on the machine," Ethan said. She poured a cup, came back, and stood at the edge of the desk studying the timeline. He let her look. She was the kind of person who needed to read something fully before she talked about it, and he'd learned that about her in the past 10 days. She got to the end, set her coffee down. "The board chair," she said, "consulting for the firm that shares office space with Langston's legal team. Retired 6 months after the inquiry closed. Clean pension, no controversy. And the text messages from your wife, they documented a reported hydraulic issue that was never addressed. 2 weeks before the crash. She'd filed a formal report to her commanding officer. The officer acknowledged receipt. He pointed to one section of the timeline. That officer was also on the meridian when it went down." Sophia was quiet, reading that section again. "So the person who could have confirmed that the report was made and ignored," she said slowly, "died in the same crash. Along with 4 others. She straightened up, looked at him. Her expression wasn't shock exactly. She was past the shock, he could tell. This was the look of someone fitting the last piece into a structure that was already mostly assembled, feeling the weight of the completed thing. "Ethan, this isn't just corruption. This is, if what this says is what it says, this is something that got 5 people killed. I know what it is. Have you told Hargrove all of this? The timeline, the board chair?" "Not the full picture yet. I wanted to have it complete before I brought it to him." He began gathering the sheets carefully. "The rezoning hearing is in 19 days. She picked up her coffee again, put it back down without drinking. 19 days is not a lot of time. No. What do you need? He looked at her. The directness of the question, not what are you going to do or what's the plan, but simply what do you need, was so unadorned that he found himself momentarily without an answer, which almost never happened to him. The shell company chain, he said. I can trace 3 layers. I think there are 4, maybe 5. If Langston has funding coming in from outside the city, investors, partners, and those connections can be documented, it strengthens the case that this isn't just a local land grab. It's a larger operation. My legal team has resources for that kind of financial tracing. She picked up the folder Patricia had compiled, flipped through it. I can have them work it today. She stopped on a page. This acquisition, Parcel 14C on the western frontage, the purchase price is significantly below assessed value. I noticed that. That kind of below-value sale doesn't happen by accident on commercial waterfront property. Someone facilitated it. She tapped the page. I want to know who the seller was and what they got in return. She looked up. Can I take these filings? I have copies. She took the folder. At the door she paused, the same way she'd been doing, and he'd started to think it was the place where she shifted between operational mode and whatever the other thing was. The less armored version. My father died 2 years ago, she said. It came out without much setup, the way significant things sometimes did when they'd been sitting on the edge of a conversation for a while, waiting for the right moment to fall. He was sick for about a year before. I kept the company running, and I kept visiting him on weekends, and I kept telling myself I was managing all of it. She looked at the floor, then back up. I wasn't managing it. I was just moving fast enough that I didn't have to feel how bad it was. A pause. What I'm saying is, I understand something about keeping things contained, how much it costs. And I don't think you should have to do the rest of this alone. He looked at her for a moment. The morning light came through the window at the angle it came through in early November, the particular low-lit November quality that turned everything a shade more serious. I appreciate that, he said, and meant it. She nodded once and went out into the yard. He called Hargrove with the full picture that afternoon, walking the timeline through from start to finish, every connection, every name, every date. Hargrove listened the way he'd always listened, completely, without interruption, without the small sounds people made when they were waiting for you to finish so they could respond. When Ethan was done, the line was quiet for almost 10 seconds. The board chair's name is Warren Kelsey, Hargrove said. Yes. I know Kelsey. His voice had the particular flatness of a man controlling something. Not well, but I know him. A pause. I want to be clear about something, Ethan. If what you've laid out is accurate, and I believe it is, then the inquiry being closed the way it was isn't something that happened in a vacuum. Someone with access to the inquiry board had to have made that happen. Kelsey was board chair, but Kelsey doesn't have the reach to manage an outcome like that entirely on his own. Who does? That's what I need to figure out. He heard the Admiral stand up, the creak of a chair, the shift in acoustic. There are people I can talk to. Not through official channels, not yet. The kind of conversations that happen before official channels, that determine whether official channels are going to be productive or whether they're going to be managed the way the first inquiry was managed. A pause. Give me a week. The hearing is in 19 days. I know. Give me a week. The week was difficult in the specific way that weeks were difficult when you were waiting for things you couldn't control while trying to maintain the surface of an ordinary life. Ethan ran the yard, signed off on the partnership agreement with Caldwell Marine, the formal version reviewed by both legal teams, solid and real. Took Lily to a school event on Thursday where she performed in a brief presentation about marine ecosystems and said the word bioluminescence with a confidence that made the parent next to Ethan laugh out loud. Bought groceries. Fixed the water heater that had been making a problematic sound for 2 weeks. Had dinner twice with his Uncle Roy, who lived 20 minutes away and who was the closest thing to immediate family either Ethan or Lily had within 300 miles. Roy Cross was 67, retired from a career in commercial fishing, with large weathered hands and a tendency to say important things sideways. He'd been the one who'd kept showing up in the first year, not asking what Ethan needed, just being present, arriving with food, fixing things that needed fixing, sitting with Lily when Ethan had appointments he couldn't take her to. On the second dinner, Roy asked about Sophia. She's a business partner, Ethan said. Roy ate a piece of bread. Lily says she comes to the yard a lot. We have a working partnership. There's a fair amount of coordination. Lily also says she has a nice pen. She left it, and Lily has appointed herself the pen's guardian. I'm not sure how that happened. Roy looked at him with the particular expression of someone who had known him since he was 7 years old and had therefore used up his entire capacity for being fooled by Ethan's neutral voice. She seems good, he said simply. She is. Ethan said it without thinking too hard about what he meant by it. She's good people. Roy nodded and passed the bread. Hargrove called 8 days later, not 7. Ethan was in the yard when the phone buzzed, and he stepped to the south fence, the quiet corner away from the machinery, to take it. "The inquiry," Hargrove said. "It was managed. I can confirm that now. The original investigator's recommendation was for a criminal referral to the Department of Justice. That recommendation was overridden at the review board level, and Kelsey was the mechanism. But Kelsey was directed." He paused. "The direction came from a congressional staffer with oversight committee access. The staffer has since moved into private consulting. His current clients include 2 firms with financial connections to Langston Capital." Ethan leaned against the fence and looked at the river through the gap. "So it goes to Washington," he said. "The edge of Washington. Not deep, but real." Hargrove's voice was measured, the way it got when he was delivering assessments that had weight. "Which means if this comes out in the wrong order, if Langston gets wind of how much you've assembled before you move, he has the reach to make things complicated. Not impossible, but complicated and slow." "The hearing is in 11 days. "Yes. If we're going to move, we need to move at the hearing." "That's what I've concluded as well." A pause. "There are people at the JAG level who are very interested in what you've described. If you're willing to present the supplementary statement and the supporting documentation publicly, at the hearing or in the process leading up to it, they will be in a position to formalize an investigation the same week." Ethan thought about that. The hearing was a city council proceeding, public record. Whatever was said there became part of an official transcript. Whatever was presented there couldn't be quietly filed and closed. "Langston will be there," he said. "Almost certainly. He'll have lawyers." "Yes, and you'll have Patricia Osei and whatever Caldwell Marine's legal team has assembled, and the documentation, and a rear admiral of the United States Navy sitting in the public gallery." Hargrove said this without drama, just fact. "I'll be there, Ethan." He didn't say anything for a moment. The river moved. "All right," he said. Sophia brought her legal team's financial trace report 4 days before the hearing, and it was thorough in a way that changed the room's air when she laid it on the desk. The shell company chain went 5 layers deep, as Ethan had suspected. The outermost layer, Harborview Development, connected back through 4 intermediate entities to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. That holding company had 2 primary investors, both of which were private equity vehicles with opaque ownership structures. But the law firm that had incorporated both vehicles had also incorporated Maritime Service and Logistics Group, the original maintenance contractor. Same law firm, same signature on the incorporation paperwork. 11 years apart. "It's the same network," Sophia said. "The company that falsified the maintenance records and the company trying to take your land are part of the same financial structure. It's not circumstantial at this point. It's documented." "Your team is confident in this?" "My head of legal has been doing this work for 20 years. She's confident." She sat down. "Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." "Go ahead." "Are you prepared for what happens if this works? Not just the hearing, but after, the investigation, the coverage, the attention. You and Lily." He looked at her. It was a real question, not a rhetorical one. She was asking because she'd thought about it, and she wanted to know what he'd thought. "Lily is 8, he said. "She'll have questions. She already has questions, most of which I've been carefully navigating around." He paused. "When this becomes public, she'll know more about how her mother died than I've told her. I've been planning for that. I've talked to a counselor who works with children." He stopped. "So, yes, I'm not prepared in the sense that anyone is prepared for something like this, but I've done what I can do to get ready." Sophia was quiet. "You?" he asked. "Me. Caldwell Marine's name is going to be in this. You've put your company's legal resources into it. You're in it." She considered this. "Yeah," she said. "I know." A pause. "I've thought about the version of myself who walked out of this yard the first day and moved on to the next evaluation on my list. Made a different call about the partnership, or no call at all." She looked at the window. "I don't think that version of me would have been wrong, exactly. It would have been the careful choice." She looked back at him. "I stopped being interested in the careful choice a while ago." He held her gaze for a moment. Something in the room shifted slightly, the way rooms did sometimes when 2 people acknowledge something without saying it directly. Then he picked up the financial trace report and went back to work. The night before the hearing, Ethan sat at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed and read through everything one more time. The supplementary statement, the text messages from Amelia, the ones she'd sent him 2 weeks before she died, matter of fact in her way. Flagged the hydraulic issue again today? Waiting on confirmation from Hendricks. Don't worry, it's probably fine. She'd sent that at 9:43 on a Wednesday evening, and he'd been on the Northbrook and had responded, "It better be." And she'd sent back a single eye roll emoji, and then the conversation had moved on to something about Lily's upcoming birthday party. He'd read those messages many times in 3 years. They never got easier, and they never got harder. They were just what they were. Evidence of a life that had been real and was still real in its particular past tense way. He put the phone down. On the counter, Lily had left a drawing she'd done that afternoon. 2 figures standing on a dock next to some water, and a smaller figure between them, and a sun. Crayon. The colors overlapping in the way her drawings did when she was working quickly. She hadn't shown it to him. She'd just left it on the counter without comment, which was also a thing she did sometimes. He looked at it for a long time. Then he gathered the documents into the folder Patricia had prepared, checked his phone one more time. A message from Sophia. "Ready. See you there." A message from Hargrove. "Confirmed attendance. Brief the JAG liaison at 8 a.m. A message from Roy. "I'll be there. Saved a seat for Lily if she needs one." And set the folder by the door for the morning. He turned off the kitchen light. The hearing was at 10. Whoa. The city council chambers were a large, high-ceilinged room in the municipal building downtown, built in the 1960s with the particular civic optimism of that era. Dark wood paneling, long public gallery benches, a raised council dais with microphones that had been updated at some point, but retained the look of their original period. It held maybe 200 people at capacity. By 9:45, it was full. Ethan arrived with Patricia at 9:30. She'd prepared him the way she prepared every witness she worked with, thoroughly, without sugarcoating what the difficult moments would look like. Langston's people will object. The council chair may try to limit your scope. You speak to the record, not to the room. Clear and complete? No embellishment? Nothing you can't document. Let the documents do the weight. He understood this. He'd given testimony before. The Navy had prepared him well for the particular discipline of saying exactly what was true and exactly what was documented, and nothing else. Hargrove was already seated in the public gallery when they arrived, in civilian clothes, which Ethan had expected. He caught his eye and gave the small nod that meant, "I see you and nothing more." Roy was in the 4th row of the gallery with a seat beside him that he'd defended with his jacket, and Ethan had not brought Lily. She was at school. She would be at school. But Roy's presence was its own kind of anchor. Sophia came in at 9:40 with her legal team, 4 of them carrying folders. She walked past Langston's cluster of attorneys without looking at them. She found Ethan's eyes across the room, and he read in her face the same thing he felt, a kind of focused steadiness, the calm that came not from the absence of tension, but from having decided. Victor Langston was already seated at the petitioner's table near the front when Ethan arrived. He was a tall man in his late 50s, silver-haired and well-dressed in the way of men who had been well-dressed for long enough that it was simply part of how they existed in rooms. He had the unremarkable face of someone who had learned that the most effective way to hold power was to look like anyone else while exercising it. He glanced at Ethan once. The glance lasted perhaps 2 seconds and communicated nothing visible. Ethan sat down, opened the folder, waited. The council members filed in at 10. The chamber quieted. The session opened with the council chair, a methodical man named Alderman Fitch, who ran hearings the way accountants ran audits, laying out the procedural ground rules. The ostensible purpose of the hearing was commercial waterfront development policy. The rezoning proposal for the Western District had been added to the agenda, Fitch noted, as a supplementary item. Langston's lead attorney, a compact woman named Claire Renard, who had the bearing of someone who had won most of the arguments she'd entered, presented the rezoning case efficiently and well. The Western District, as currently constituted, was economically underperforming, she argued. The proposed development would generate significant tax revenue, commercial activity, and employment. The affected parcels were industrial or quasi-industrial operations with limited community footprint. The rezoning was a straightforward modernization of land use policy in keeping with the city's stated economic development goals. She presented charts. She presented endorsement letters from 3 council members who were not on the dais today, letters, Ethan noted, that had been solicited before this hearing was on the public agenda. Several council members asked questions. Some of the questions were genuine. Some were the kind of questions that people asked when they already knew the answer and were simply establishing a record of their own reasonableness. Fitch opened the floor to objections. Patricia stood. She laid out the property rights case first, the survey markers, the cease and desist, the below-market parcel acquisitions, the procedural irregularities in the preliminary rezoning submission. She was methodical and precise, and she kept her voice at the level of professional neutrality that made everything she said sound like fact rather than argument, which was because it was fact. The council took notes. Then she introduced Sophia. Sophia walked to the public comment podium, and she did not look at Langston's table. She looked at the council, and she spoke with the directness that Ethan had come to understand as simply her, the absence of performance, the preference for the plain shape of a thing. She laid out Caldwell Marine's position, the operational impact of the rezoning on her company's waterfront logistics. She laid out the financial trace her legal team had conducted, the 5-layer shell company structure, the Cayman Holding Company, the shared law firm connecting Harbor View Development to Maritime Service and Logistics Group. She named each company and each connection clearly, and she put the supporting documents on the record by reference number. The chamber had been attentive before. Now it was different. The particular quality of a room in which people were beginning to understand that the conversation had changed. Renard objected twice. Fitch overruled her both times, noting the public interest weight of documented financial connections. Langston was still. Ethan, watching from the side, thought about all the years of practiced stillness that produced that kind of stillness. The stillness of someone who had managed many difficult rooms and believed, until the moment the evidence was otherwise, that this one was manageable too. Then Fitch said, "Is there additional public comment?" And Ethan stood up. He walked to the podium. Patricia had coached him on the order. The property rights claim first, then the partnership with Caldwell Marine as evidence of the yard's legitimate commercial operation, then the Meridian. Save the Meridian for last because once it was in the room, nothing else would be heard with the same ears. He spoke clearly and without notes for the first section. He knew the property facts cold. He laid them out in 3 minutes. Then he reached into the folder and removed the supplementary statement. 3 years ago, he said, my wife, Lieutenant Commander Amelia Cross, was killed in the crash of the Meridian, a Navy transport helicopter operating out of this coast. The official inquiry found inadequate maintenance by the contracted service company, Maritime Service and Logistics Group. He paused. At the time of the inquiry, I filed a supplementary statement documenting evidence that the maintenance records for the Meridian had been altered, and that my wife had formally reported a known hydraulic issue in the main rotor assembly 2 weeks before the crash. I have that statement here. I also have the original communications documenting her report. The chamber was quiet in a way that was total. He put the statement on the record. He cited the dates, the document numbers, the content. He referenced Hargrove by name and rank as a corroborating contact. He described the board chair's subsequent career path and the financial connections between that career path and Langston Capital. He kept his voice flat and even and complete. He did not editorialize. He did not perform grief. He simply stated what had happened and what he knew and what was documented, the way he'd once stood on the bridge of the Northbrook in 30-foot seas and called out bearings. Not because the calmness was easy, but because the calmness was the thing that was needed, the thing that brought everyone home. When he finished, the chamber was still silent. Then 3 things happened at roughly the same moment. Renard was on her feet with a formal objection, Alderman Fitch was calling for order, and Victor Langston, for the first time since Ethan had watched him enter the room, was leaning toward his attorneys with an expression that was no longer the studied unremarkability of a man who believed he had the room. In the public gallery, Hargrove sat with his hands folded and his face composed. Roy had his hands on his knees and was looking at the back of Ethan's head with an expression that Ethan couldn't see but that he would have recognized if he had. the expression of someone who had known someone a long time and was watching them do something that needed to be done. Sophia was at the side of the room, standing, and when Ethan stepped back from the podium and turned, he found her eyes for a second across the distance. She gave him a single small nod, not congratulatory, not relieved. Just, "I'm here. I see you. You did it right." He nodded back. Fitch called a 15-minute recess. The chamber erupted into the kind of noise that 15 minutes was never going to quiet. Ethan went back to his seat, sat down, and put the folder on the table in front of him. His hands were steady. He was aware of Patricia next to him, talking quietly on the phone. Aware of Hargrove making his way down from the gallery. Aware of the room in motion around him, the specific chaos of a truth that had just become too public to manage. He looked at the folder. Inside it, behind the supplementary statement, was the last text message Amelia had ever sent him. Not the safety flag chain, a different one, sent the evening before she shipped out on the final rotation. "Lily's birthday present is in the closet on the high shelf. Don't let her find it early. You know how she is." And then, because she was Amelia, "Don't worry about anything. I'll be home by Thursday." He hadn't read that one out loud today. He hadn't needed to. It wasn't evidence of anything except who she was, and who she was didn't need a public record. He closed the folder. Outside, through the chamber's high windows, the November sky was the particular gray-white of a cold, clear day, the kind of sky that sat over the water when the wind was coming off the river and the whole coast smelled like salt and rust and the season turning. He'd lived in that smell for 3 years. He was still here. The 15-minute recess became 40. Fitch used it to confer with the city attorney, a quiet, deliberate woman named Sandra Chu, who had been in the chamber for the entire session and who, Ethan noticed, had been taking notes in a separate legal pad from the official record, the kind of notes people took when they were building a parallel file. When the session resumed, Fitch's manner had shifted, not dramatically, but the particular procedural neutrality he'd maintained through Langston's presentation had acquired a different quality, the kind that came when a public official understood that the record they were building today was going to be examined closely for a long time. He announced that the Western District rezoning proposal was being placed on administrative hold pending review of the documentation entered into the public record. The formal ethics referral would be processed through the city attorney's office. The hearing on commercial waterfront development policy would continue on its original scope. Renard was on her feet immediately. She argued efficiently and with real force. Procedural overreach, insufficient basis, her client's right to a fair process. Fitch heard her out and overruled the objection with a brevity that told the room he'd already thought through all of it. Langston stood up. It was the first time he'd moved significantly since the hearing began, and the room registered it. The particular stillness that fell when someone who has been quiet for a long time suddenly puts themselves in the picture. "Alderman Fitch," Langston said, and his voice was measured and unhurried, the voice of a man who had been in contentious rooms before. "With respect, I think the council should understand that the allegations raised today are exactly that. Allegations. Unverified, emotionally charged, and strategically timed. I have every sympathy for Mr. Cross's personal loss." He paused, the sympathy landing with the precision of a man who knew how to use it. "But grief is not evidence, and a grieving father's interpretation of events is not a basis for suspending a legitimate development proposal that has community and economic merits that this council has already—" "Mr. Langston," Fitch's voice cut across his without raising. "You are not recognized. Sit down." It was a small thing, as things went, but the room heard it. The moment when a man who expected to be heard discovered the room's disposition had changed. Langston sat down. His face gave nothing away, but Renard leaned toward him immediately, and they conferred in low, urgent tones. Ethan was watching from his seat. He felt Patricia's hand on his arm briefly. Not guidance, just acknowledgement. Hargrove had come down from the gallery during the recess and was now seated 2 rows behind Ethan. He didn't say anything. His presence was the thing that mattered, the particular weight of someone who represented institutional legitimacy and who had chosen, visibly and in a public record, which side of the room to sit on. The JAG liaison was a young captain named Mercer, who'd been in the building since 8 that morning and who met with Ethan and Patricia in a conference room on the 2nd floor while the public session continued below. He had the precise, unemotive manner of someone trained to gather facts without editorializing about them, and he worked through Ethan's documentation methodically and without the dramatic punctuation that civilians sometimes brought to this kind of material. When they finished, Mercer stacked the copies he'd made and looked at Ethan directly. You understand that a formal reinvestigation of a closed inquiry involves a lengthy process. I understand that, and that the outcome of that process is not guaranteed. Also understand that. What I can tell you, Mercer said, is that the documentation you've provided is sufficient to open a formal review. That review will be conducted by a team that was not involved in the original inquiry. The congressional staffer connection will be referred to a separate investigative office. He paused. The alterations to the maintenance records, if they can be confirmed forensically, which is possible given the digital filing systems in use at the time, change the legal character of this significantly. From negligence to what? Patricia asked. That's what the review will determine. He looked at Ethan again. Captain Cross, you've carried this for 3 years without the formal process giving you anything useful. I want to be honest with you. I can't promise this will be faster or less frustrating than what came before. What I can promise is that it won't be closed by a board chair with connections to the people you're investigating. Ethan nodded. It wasn't a comforting answer. It was an honest one, which was what he'd actually needed. Good enough, he said. Bah. He picked Lily up from school at the regular time because whatever was happening with the adult machinery of the world, the school day ended at 3:45, and she came out through the double doors with her backpack and her yellow jacket and the particular expression she had when she'd been thinking about something all day and was ready to report. Marcus Tillman said his dad saw something on the news about our yard, she said, falling into step beside him. What did he say? He said his dad said a man named Langston was trying to take our yard. Ethan looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, processing and reporting simultaneously, the way she did. That's basically accurate, he said. Are we going to lose the yard? No, but she took this at face value the way she took most of what he told her, not because she was naive, but because she'd learned, in the particular education of a child who'd lost something enormous, to read the difference between the reassurances people offered because they didn't know what else to say, and the ones that came from somewhere real. Okay, she said. They walked half a block. Is the yard why Mom's helicopter crashed? She asked. He stopped walking. She stopped too, and looked up at him. Her face was serious and a little afraid, but not in the way of a child who'd asked too much. In the way of a child who'd figured something out and wasn't sure if she was supposed to have figured it out yet. He crouched down to her level on the sidewalk. He'd been preparing for this conversation. He'd talked to the counselor. He'd thought about what he would say and how he would say it and when. He hadn't planned for it to be a Tuesday afternoon on the walk home from school, crouched on the sidewalk in the cold November air. But Lily had always had her own schedule for things. The helicopter crash was caused by people not doing their job properly, he said carefully, by people making bad choices to cover up a problem instead of fixing it. And yes, the same people are connected to what happened with the yard. He held her eyes. I found out about that connection, and today I told the people who are supposed to make it right, which is what happened this morning. Lily was very still. Did you know for a long time? She asked. Some of it for a long time, all of it more recently. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to understand it myself first, and because I needed to make sure I was doing the right thing with it before I brought it to you. He paused. That's not me protecting you from the truth, Bug. That's me making sure the truth I brought you was the whole one. She thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. Okay, she said a second time, but it meant something different this time. It meant, I'm going to need to think about this for a while, and I'm going to have more questions, and I'm telling you right now that I'm okay, so you know you haven't broken me. He knew her well enough to read all of that. He stood up, took her hand, and they kept walking. The ethics investigation was formalized by the city attorney's office 4 days after the hearing. The referral covered the shell company acquisitions, the zoning board votes, and the campaign finance connections. Within the week, 2 of the city council members who'd received donations from Langston Civic Foundation had retained private counsel, which was not an announcement of guilt, but was an announcement of something. Langston Capital's office issued a statement characterizing the investigation as politically motivated and expressing full confidence in the process. The statement used the word confident 3 times in 4 sentences, which Sophia, reading it on her phone while sitting in Ethan's office, noted was a bad sign for anyone actually confident. When people say confident, that many times they're practicing, she said. I know. Ethan was at his desk reviewing the Navy's formal acknowledgement of the reinvestigation, a letter on official stationery that was bureaucratically neutral in its language and that nonetheless represented the thing he'd been waiting 3 years for. His legal team filed for a stay on the ethics investigation this morning. Patricia says it won't hold. My legal team agrees. She set her phone down. The financial trace is in the hands of 2 separate regulatory offices now. The Cayman connection alone is enough to keep investigators busy for months. She looked at him. This is going to be long. I know that. The yard is safe for now, but Langston isn't. He's not just going to go quiet. Also know that. He looked up from the letter. What I know about men like Langston is that they have contingency plans, and when the public plan fails, they move to the contingency. What I don't know yet is what the contingency is. He paused. So I'm watching. She held his gaze. You're good at watching. Spent 20 years on ships. You watch the water, you watch the sky, you watch the instruments. You watch everything that isn't currently a problem, because that's where the next problem is coming from. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that surprised him. Are you watching me? He looked at her steadily. Yes. What do you see? He thought about it. The honest answer was more complicated than the tactical one, and he'd never been someone who preferred the simpler version of a true thing. Someone who showed up and did the work and kept doing it when there was no particular reason she had to, he said. Someone who stepped around my daughter's shell collection. He paused. Someone I trust. The word sat in the room for a second. He didn't retract it. Sophia looked at the desk, then back at him. Ethan, she said, and the way she said his name was different from how she said it on the phone. Different from the professional register of the first weeks. Just his name, said plainly, which somehow made it carry more than any elaboration would have. I know, he said quietly. She nodded once, and then, because they were both people who dealt with things by working, she picked up the document she'd brought and they kept going. 3 weeks after this hearing, Victor Langston resigned from the boards of all 3 of his public-facing companies. The announcement came through a statement from his attorney, not Renard, a different one, which told its own story, and was worded in the language of a man protecting future legal position rather than a man who had made a choice. The development proposal for the Western Waterfront District was formally withdrawn the same day. Ethan read the news on his phone while eating lunch in the yard. He read it twice, put the phone in his pocket, and went back to the harbor tender he'd been working on. He didn't feel what he'd expected to feel. Not triumph, nothing clean. What he felt was closer to the way a wound felt in the days after it had stopped actively bleeding. Not healed, not unaware of itself, but the worst of it behind. Roy called that evening. Saw the news, Roy said. Yeah. You doing all right? I'm okay. Lily? She's working on a project about migratory patterns of Pacific gray whales. She's been drawing charts. Roy laughed, the real kind. That's my girl. A pause. Ethan, what you did, what you stood up and said in that room. Roy, I'm saying it. You don't have to respond to it, but I'm saying it. Amelia would have been, he stopped. Ethan waited. She'd have been proud, Roy said finally, not elaborating, knowing Ethan well enough to know that was the word, and nothing needed to be added to it. Thank you, Ethan said. After he hung up, he stood on the back porch for a while in the cold. The city made its city sounds. The river was somewhere in the dark beyond the yard fence, moving the way it always moved, indifferent and constant and real. The advisory role with the Navy, the one Hargrove had been proposing for months, took a different shape after the hearing. It was no longer just a maritime analysis position. Mercer's review team had opened a working channel with Ethan as a consultative contact on the Meridian reinvestigation, and the two things combined into something that was, finally, what Hargrove had always said it could be. Work that was real and that connected to the expertise Ethan had, without the cost of the life he'd built with Lily. He signed the advisory agreement on a Thursday morning. Lily was at school. He signed it at the kitchen table with a pen that was not Sophia's pen, but that he noticed was the same brand, which he decided not to examine too carefully. He called Sophia afterward. "I signed the Navy advisory agreement," he said. "Good." He could hear something in her voice, the particular warmth she deployed quietly, without announcement. "How do you feel about it?" "Like it's the right size," he said. "Like it fits what I can actually carry right now." "That's a good way to find things," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The partnership launch, the formal operations start date, end of the month. The 28th, yes. I want to do something to market. Not a big thing, just..." He wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. "Dinner," she said. "The three of us. Somewhere Lily picks." He hadn't been expecting the three of us. He sat with it for a second, found that it felt right in the way the advisory agreement had felt right. The right size, the right fit. "She'll pick somewhere that serves clam chowder," he said. "She's been on a shellfish research phase." "I like clam chowder." "Do you? Don't sound surprised." "I'm not surprised." He paused. 28th then. 28th. The dinner was at a seafood place near the waterfront that Lily had identified through a research process she described as asking Mrs. Calloway and also looking at pictures online. It was not fancy. It had paper tablecloths and the kind of ambient noise that made conversation feel easy, and the clam chowder came in a bread bowl, which Lily had apparently known about and considered the decisive factor. She sat across from Sophia and explained the bread bowl concept with the thoroughness of a person sharing significant information. "You eat the bowl," she said. "That's the thing." "I've had a bread bowl before," Sophia said. Lily considered this. "Did you eat the bowl?" "I did eat the bowl." "Good." Satisfied. She picked up her spoon. The dinner was easy in a way that Ethan hadn't known to expect. Lily asked Sophia about ships. She'd moved through whales and dolphins and was currently interested in large vessels, which meant she had questions about Caldwell Marine's fleet that were specific enough to make Sophia laugh with something like surprise. "How do you know about ballast water systems?" Sophia asked. "I read," Lily said, as though this were obvious. "She reads everything," Ethan confirmed. "There's a chapter about it in a book about big ships," Lily said. "It's in the school library. I've checked it out 3 times. She ate some chowder. "Dad won't let me check it out a 4th time because he says the library needs it back." "The library does need it back," Ethan said. "I have the important parts memorized." Sophia looked at Ethan over the top of Lily's head with an expression that was equal parts amusement and something warmer and less easily named. He met her eyes and there was a moment, brief, unremarkable from the outside, the kind of thing that happened between two people at a table in a loud seafood restaurant, in which something was acknowledged that had been accumulating for weeks. Then Lily asked about tidal patterns, and the conversation moved on. Walking back to the car afterward, Lily between them on the sidewalk, she took Ethan's hand the way she always did when they were walking at night, and then, without comment, without apparent deliberation, with the casual certainty of a child who had decided something was a reasonable thing to do, she reached up and took Sophia's hand with her other one. Sophia's stride didn't break. She didn't look at Ethan. She just held on. Lily swung their hands once, looking up at the streetlights, and said, "I think I need to check out the library book a 4th time." "We'll talk to the librarian," Ethan said. "You always say that." "And yet here we are." Lily sighed the sigh of a child surrounded by adults with excessive respect for library policies. Sophia was looking straight ahead, and Ethan could see the small smile at the corner of her mouth that she wasn't trying to suppress. A month after Langston's resignation, Roy Cross had a heart attack. It happened on a Wednesday morning in his kitchen while he was making coffee. His neighbor, an older woman named Harriet, who kept an eye on him the way neighbors in that kind of neighborhood kept an eye on each other, found him when she noticed his car hadn't moved by mid-morning and came to check. The hospital called Ethan at 10:47. He was in the yard. He was with Sophia, as it happened, reviewing inventory. He saw Roy's name on the phone and answered it, and the voice on the other end was Harriet, calm in the way of people who'd seen hard things before, telling him what she knew and what she didn't know, and where Roy was. He hung up. Sophia was watching him. She'd seen his face change. "My uncle," he said. "Hospital." She was already picking up her keys. "Go. I'll close up the yard." "You don't have to—" "Go, Ethan." He went. The next several hours were the particular texture of hospital waiting, the overhead lighting that was neither day nor night, the coffee that tasted like nothing, the conversations with nurses that were informative and insufficient simultaneously. Roy had had a significant cardiac event. He was in surgery. The surgeon was good, and the outlook was cautiously optimistic, which was the most you ever got in that building, and which Ethan had learned to hear without reading either hope or hopelessness into it. He called Lily's school and arranged for her to go home with her friend Marisol until he could collect her. He called Marisol's mother, who said, of course, "Take all the time you need," the way people said it when they meant it. He sat in the waiting room and did the thing he'd learned to do in the worst kinds of waiting, found the thing in the room that was real and concrete, the grain of the table, the pattern of the floor tile, the weight of his own hands, and stayed in it. Sophia arrived at the hospital at 1 p.m. She hadn't called ahead. She came through the waiting room door with 2 cups of coffee from somewhere outside the building, real coffee, not the waiting room variety, and sat down next to him and handed him one. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know." She didn't make anything of it, just sat there. He took the coffee. They sat in the waiting room for 2 more hours. They didn't talk much. There wasn't a lot to say, and Sophia seemed to understand that talking for the sake of filling silence was not what was needed. She was just there, steady and present, the way Roy had been in Ethan's worst year. At 3:20, the surgeon came out. Roy was out of surgery, stable. He would need recovery and monitoring and significant lifestyle adjustment, and he was going to be angry about the lifestyle adjustment for at least a month, but he was alive, and the prognosis was real. Ethan sat back in the chair and closed his eyes for about 10 seconds. When he opened them, Sophia's hand was on the table beside his, not on top of his hand, beside it, close enough to be felt without being a claim he hadn't made yet. He put his hand over hers. Neither of them said anything. Roy spent a week in the hospital. Ethan visited every day, sometimes twice. Lily visited 3 times, and on the second visit brought Roy a drawing she'd made of a boat. Not the patient's, a different one, bigger, with sails. And Roy put it on the tray table next to his bed and told her it was the best boat he'd ever seen. And Lily said she knew because she'd worked on it for an hour and a half. On the 4th day, when Lily wasn't with him, Roy looked at Ethan from the hospital bed with the expression of a man who had recently had a significant reminder about the relationship between time and availability. "The Caldwell woman," Roy said. "She's my business partner. She sat in a hospital waiting room for 2 hours. Roy, I'm not saying anything. I'm noting a fact." He adjusted the pillow behind him. "I'm also noting that you look different than you did in October." "I look the same." "You look like someone who has somewhere to look forward to," Roy said, with the bluntness of a man who'd nearly died and had reevaluated the cost of indirection. "That's different from how you've looked for 3 years. Ethan was quiet. "Amelia," Roy said carefully, "would not have wanted you to wait." "I know that." "Do you?" He looked at his uncle Sut, the man who'd shown up with groceries in the worst year, who'd sat with Lily, who'd held the shape of the family together when the shape was barely there. The man who had known Amelia and known Ethan and understood the weight of both. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I do." Roy nodded, satisfied, and reached for the remote control. On the afternoon Roy came home from the hospital. Ethan drove him from the discharge entrance to his house and sat with him for an hour while the home health aide, Harriet, had helped arrange got him settled. On the way out, Roy stopped him at the door. "The Navy thing," he said. "The reinvestigation. Moving forward. The yard? Safe. The rezoning's dead. And the rest of it? The rest of it is going to take time." He met Roy's eyes. "But it's moving." Roy put a hand on his shoulder briefly.
The gesture of an older man who didn't say everything out loud, but made sure you knew it was there. "Good," he said. "Good." Ethan drove back to the yard in the afternoon light, the late November sun low and long across the river, turning the water the color of old brass. He had a call with Mercer at 4 and an inventory review with his crew at 4:30, and Lily needed to be picked up at 5 from Marisol's house where she'd spent the afternoon.
The day had the shape of a real day, complicated and full and imperfect, and demanding the specific things that only he could provide. He parked outside the yard and sat in the car for a moment. The sign above the gate, Cross Salvage, hand-painted 3 years ago, the lettering not entirely level, caught the afternoon light the same way it always did. Behind it, the yard was what it had always been, salvage and rust and river salt and the specific value of things that had been used hard and hadn't quit. He'd built this in the hardest year. He'd held Lily through the worst of it and built this and stayed. The Meridian reinvestigation was open. The ethics case was moving. The partnership with Caldwell Marine was real and operational. Roy was home. Lily was at Marisol's house drawing pictures of boats and asking questions about tidal patterns, and growing, day by day, into someone who was going to be formidable in the specific way her mother had been formidable. He got out of the car, went through the gate, and got back to work. The Meridian reinvestigation findings came through on a Tuesday in February, 14 weeks after the city council hearing. Ethan was in the office when Mercer called. It was mid-morning, the yard running at its normal pace outside, one of his crew working a generator engine near the south fence, the sound of it steady and unremarkable. Ethan had been reviewing a reclamation schedule for the Caldwell Marine contract. The partnership had been operational for 6 weeks, and the work was real and solid in the way he'd hoped it would be. He answered the phone, and Mercer's voice was the same precise, unemotive register it always was. But there was something underneath it today, a kind of weight that professional neutrality couldn't quite fully contain. The forensic analysis confirmed the record alteration, Mercer said. The original maintenance log showed a documented hydraulic fault in the main rotor assembly flagged 4 weeks before the crash. The corrected records filed by Maritime Service and Logistics Group removed that entry entirely. The alteration was not clerical error. The metadata shows deliberate deletion and replacement by a user account registered to the company's operations manager at the time. Ethan was quiet. The operations manager, Mercer continued, was employed by Maritime Service and Logistics Group from its founding. He has since been employed through the successor entity Harborview Marine in a consulting capacity by 2 firms connected to Langston Capital. He paused. A criminal referral has been made to the Department of Justice. The congressional staffer connection has been referred separately to the relevant oversight body. This is now out of the military review system and in federal hands. What does that mean for timeline? Ethan asked. It means it will be slow, and it will be thorough, and it will not be managed, Mercer said, which is different from what happened the first time. He sat with that for a moment. The generator outside kept running, steady and indifferent and real. Thank you, Captain, he said. Thank you for bringing it forward, Mercer said. It should have been addressed 3 years ago. I'm sorry it wasn't. After he hung up, Ethan sat in the office for a while without moving, not processing exactly. He'd been living with the shape of this for long enough that the confirmation didn't reshape anything. It was more like the difference between knowing something was true and having it formally witnessed. The record existed now. It was clean and documented and out in the world, and it could not be filed away. He thought about Amelia. Not the text messages, not the evidence, just her. The specific reality of who she'd been, the way she'd argued with him about navigation routes on their first date, which had been on a harbor tour boat, in which she'd turned into an extended debate about tidal current patterns that had made him fall for her before they'd finished the first hour. The way she'd held Lily for the first time, in the hospital, with an expression of absolute concentration, like she was memorizing something. The way she'd sent "It's probably fine" at 9:43 on a Wednesday night, not because she wasn't worried, but because she didn't want him to spend the night worrying when he couldn't do anything about it from 800 miles away. She had been careful and brave and a little stubborn and deeply, practically competent, and she had reported a safety problem through proper channels because that was what you did. And it had not been enough to save her, And the people who had made it not enough had walked away clean for 3 years. They were not walking away anymore. He stood up, pocketed his phone, and went out into the yard to tell his crew they were breaking for lunch early and he was buying. He called Sophia from the parking lot of the sandwich place where they'd eaten, leaning against his truck in the cold February air while his crew went inside. She answered immediately. "Mercer called you. You knew it was coming today?" "Hargrove told me last night. He wanted me to know before you called." A pause. "I didn't want to call you and tell you before Mercer did. It needed to come from the official channel first." "Yeah." He looked at the sky, the flat gray of a February midday. "It's federal now. DOJ referral." "I know." Her voice was quiet and warm in the way it got when she wasn't performing anything. "How are you?" It was the question he'd been asked many times in the past 3 years, and he'd gotten efficient at the answer that ended the conversation. "I'm okay, I'm managing, we're doing fine." He didn't give that answer now. "Relieved," he said. "Not happy exactly. Just the weight of it is different now that it's real." "Different how?" He thought about it. "Like it's been handed to the right people. Like it's not just sitting in my kitchen anymore." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a real thing to feel. I also feel like I want to take Lily somewhere this weekend, somewhere she picks. Just go." "That sounds right. She'll pick somewhere with water. She'll always pick somewhere with water." "She's her mother's daughter," he said, and it came out more easily than it once had, not without weight, but without the weight crushing the words on the way out. Amelia's name and Lily's name together in the same breath carried the way they should be carried, as the truth of the thing, not as something too painful to hold. Sophia heard it. He knew she heard it. She didn't comment on it directly, which was the right call, and which he noted as another piece of evidence that she understood things without requiring them to be explained. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. I'm glad you're still standing." He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so direct and so unadorned and so exactly the thing she meant, and that was Sophia. She didn't circle the point, she didn't dress things up. She said the plain shape of what was true and left it there. "Still standing," he confirmed. Victor Langston's public collapse was not the dramatic single moment that stories like to pretend these things were. It was a slow erosion, a formal indictment on fraud and conspiracy charges that came down 6 weeks after the DOJ referral, followed by a civil suit from the families of the other 4 Meridian victims, followed by the unraveling of the shell company financial structure as federal investigators worked the layers that Sophia's legal team had first identified. His attorneys issued statements. He gave one interview in which he maintained that the charges were unfounded and the investigation was politically motivated, and his voice was steady and his face was composed, and it was the performance of a man who had spent decades in rooms where performances were what mattered. But the rooms had changed. Patricia Osei called Ethan after the indictment. "The property situation is permanently resolved," she said. "The rezoning proposal is dead and buried, and Langston's legal exposure means none of his associated entities are making moves on anything for the foreseeable future." "And the families?" he asked. "The civil suit is solid. The forensic records are their backbone. The families will have a long fight, but they'll have it with real evidence." She paused. "Because of what you put on the record." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said thank you and meant it and let it be enough. The congressional staffer investigation took longer, moved more slowly, produced results that were quieter but no less real. A formal censure, a lost consulting contract, a name that stopped appearing on the right invitation lists. The mechanisms of power protected their own up to the point where the cost of protecting exceeded the cost of cutting loose, and then they cut, and that was always how it worked, and it was insufficient, and it was what existed. He knew the world was not going to be made clean by any of this. He'd known that for a long time. Amelia was not coming back. The 4 others on the Meridian were not coming back. The years that had been spent with the inquiry closed and the responsible parties walking freely were not going to be given back. What existed was the record. The formal, public, unmanaged record. The truth in a place where it could not be unfiled. He'd decided, somewhere in the months since the hearing, that this was enough to build on. It wasn't peace, exactly. It was something more like the foundation under peace, the solid ground you needed before you could do anything else. Lily's birthday was in December, and she turned 9 with the seriousness of a child who had been waiting for a specific number and was now in possession of it. She had a party with 6 friends from school held at the yard, which had been Lily's idea, and which Ethan had agreed to with the private acknowledgement that his daughter had an unusual relationship with the concept of venue. And Sophia had come, and Roy had come, recovered and present and complaining warmly about the cold while wearing the heaviest coat Ethan had ever seen. At some point in the afternoon, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the yard watching Lily instruct her 6 friends in the proper methodology for shell collection, which apparently involved a ranking system for shape, color, and what Lily called interest value, which she had defined and which she was now explaining with the authority of a person who had given this considerable thought. Sophia came to stand beside him.
"She's going to run something someday," Sophia said.
"I know. A company, an expedition, something. She already runs the shell collection program. I just provide the yard." Sophia laughed, the real kind, unguarded. He'd been accumulating those. The first time he'd heard it had been in the 4th week of the partnership, when Lily had announced that a particularly large piece of salvage hull plating was, in her assessment, very dramatic. And Sophia had laughed with her whole face, surprised out of composure, and Ethan had thought, there it is. The version of her that existed when she wasn't running anything. Roy had drifted over to where the kids were and had apparently been recruited into demonstrating something because he was now crouched on the ground next to Lily, holding a shell and listening to her explanation with the focused expression of a man receiving important technical information. "Your uncle looks good," Sophia said. "He's doing better. He complains about the diet restrictions loudly enough that you'd think the restrictions were the health emergency. But his numbers are good and he's walking every morning." "The walking was your idea." "Roy's idea. I just agreed with it every time he mentioned it until he committed to it." She looked at him sideways. "That's what he told me. He said you were very patient about it. When did you and Roy have a conversation about this?" "Last week. He called to ask me what you were getting Lily for her birthday because he wanted to make sure they didn't overlap." She said it easily, without making anything of the fact that his uncle had called her directly, which told him that she and Roy had apparently established the kind of relationship where that was a normal thing. He thought about Roy's voice on the phone from the hospital. "You look like someone who has somewhere to look forward to." "He likes you," Ethan said. "I like him." She paused. "He told me a story about you in a fishing boat when you were 11. You got the boat stuck on a sandbar, and instead of asking for help, you spent 3 hours trying to figure it out yourself." "That story is mostly accurate." He said the partly inaccurate part is that you did eventually ask for help, which he considers the important part of the story. Ethan looked at Roy, crouching in the yard with a shell in his hand, listening to his 9-year-old granddaughter, by everything except blood, explain the taxonomy of river shells. The winter light was pale and clean, and it caught the gray in Roy's hair and the copper in Lily's, and the particular quality of an afternoon that knew it was the kind that got remembered. "He's right," Ethan said quietly. "That is the important part." The Amelia Cross Educational Trust was formally established in March, 7 months after the City Council hearing, with a joint founding contribution from Ethan and Caldwell Marine Solutions. It hadn't been either of their ideas exactly. It had emerged from a conversation that happened on a Thursday evening in Ethan's kitchen, the two of them working through paperwork at the table after Lily was in bed, and Sophia had said, almost offhand, that she'd been looking at military family support organizations and the gap in funding for children who'd lost a parent in service-connected accidents. Ethan had been quiet for a moment. Then he'd said, "What would it take to start something specific, not a donation, something that carries her name?" Sophia had looked at him across the table. "I've been thinking about that for 2 months," she said. "I didn't know how to bring it up." "You just did." "What?" They'd worked on it for 3 more weeks before bringing in Patricia and Sophia's legal team, and the trust was structured to provide educational support and family counseling resources to military families affected by service-connected accidents, specifically in cases where accountability had been delayed or contested, which was, as Patricia noted with the dryness of a lawyer who had seen too many of those cases, a non-trivially large category. The first formal meeting of the Trust's board was held in Sophia's office downtown. Ethan, Sophia, Patricia, a retired JAG officer who'd agreed to serve on the board, and Hargrove, who'd accepted the invitation without hesitation. There was a framed photo of Amelia on the conference room table. Ethan had brought it, at Lily's insistence. It was a photo taken on a dock somewhere, Amelia in uniform, squinting slightly against the sun, not posed, caught mid-sentence, which was probably the most accurate representation of her that existed in still form. After the meeting, walking out to the parking garage, Hargrove fell into step beside Ethan. "She'd have argued with half the trust structure," Hargrove said. "She'd have been right about at least some of it." "Yes," he paused. "She argued with me twice in her career. Both times she was right." He said it without self-pity, just as fact. The honest accounting of a man who'd outlived people he respected. The world is smaller without her in it. "Yeah," Ethan said. "It is." They walked the rest of the way to the garage without speaking, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Lily knew more by spring than Ethan had told her in any single conversation. Children assembled knowledge in pieces, from adult conversations they were present at the edges of, from news on phones, from the specific attentiveness of a child who was paying more attention than the adults in the room gave her credit for. She came to him one evening in April with the directness she'd inherited from both her parents and said, "The people who made Mom's helicopter crash, are they in trouble now?" He was at the kitchen table. She sat across from him. "Yes," he said. "Real trouble. Not just saying sorry. Real trouble. Federal criminal charges. Civil suits from the other families." He held her gaze. "It's going to take a long time. These things always do. But it's real." She absorbed this. "Does it make you feel better?" she asked. He thought about it. The honest answer was complicated, and she was 9, and she had asked a direct question, and she deserved the honest version, not the simple one. "Not better exactly," he said. "It makes me feel like the thing that happened to her, the wrong of it, is being seen by the right people now. Not fixed, not undone, but seen and named and addressed." He paused. "Does that make sense?" Lily thought about it with the seriousness of someone who was genuinely evaluating whether it made sense, rather than just deciding whether to accept it. "Like when you have to tell a teacher something bad happened, even if it doesn't unbreak the thing," she said slowly. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like that." She nodded, satisfied. Then, "Is the trust named after her going to help kids whose parents died?" "Yes. Military families mostly. Kids and parents both. Can I be involved when I'm older?" He felt the catch in his chest, the one that had softened over months but hadn't gone away and probably never would, because some things earned their permanence. "Absolutely," he said. She got up from the table, apparently finished with the conversation, then turned back once. "Dad?" "Yeah." "I think she'd be happy with how things turned out." She said it with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had thought about this before and arrived at a settled conclusion. Not sentimental, just stated. He didn't trust his voice for a second. "Me too, bug," he managed. She went to her room. He sat at the table in the kitchen quiet for a while, with the night outside the windows and the starfish nightlight doing its small orange work in the hallway. The dock behind the salvage yard, the private berth access that had made the property valuable enough to be worth corrupting an inquiry for, had been unserviceable when Ethan bought the land. He'd fixed it in the second year piece by piece, in the spare hours between running the yard and being a father. It wasn't large. Room for 2 or 3 small boats, a narrow walkway, a rusted cleat that he'd never bothered replacing because it was solid enough. In the early autumn of that year, almost a full year since Sophia had first walked through his front gate in heels that didn't belong in a scrapyard, Ethan was on the dock in the late afternoon, sitting on a salvage crate with a cup of coffee going cold, watching the river. He heard the gate and footsteps on the path, and then Sophia was at the edge of the dock, and behind her, Lily, who had apparently finished her homework in record time and determined that the dock was the current location of relevance. Lily walked past both of them to the end of the dock and crouched down at the edge, looking into the water with the intense focus she brought to all things aquatic. She was wearing the yellow jacket, which Ethan had finally had to replace.
The original had gone to the school's clothing donation box with a ceremonial solemnity that he had treated with appropriate respect. But the new one was the same yellow, because Lily had been very specific at the store. Sophia sat on the dock railing, which was not structurally ideal, but which had held for 2 years and showed no sign of changing that. Mercer sent an update, she said. She didn't elaborate immediately. How's it looking? Solid. The operations manager's attorney approached the DOJ about a cooperation arrangement last week. Mercer thinks he's going to take it. She looked at the river. When someone that deep in the structure starts cooperating, the case against Langston gets significantly stronger. How long until trial does Mercer think? 18 months, maybe 24. Probably 24. She said it without frustration, which was something he'd watched her learn to do with the pace of institutional processes. The acceptance that slow didn't mean stopped. The civil suit from the other families is moving faster. Their attorney is good. I know. I've spoken with her. He'd been in contact with the other families since the indictment. Careful, limited contact, because he was a witness, and Patricia had been specific about what those relationships could and couldn't look like before trial, but real contact. Checking in, being available, being the one person who'd been there at the beginning and who'd made the record that gave them the case they were fighting. One of the families had a daughter who was 12. She had sent him a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, that he had read twice and then put in the same drawer as Amelia's text messages, the things you kept because they were evidence of something that deserved to be kept. On the dock, Lily said, "There's something silver down there. I can see it." "It's probably a fish," Ethan said. "It's too shiny for a fish." "Fish can be shiny." "Dad?" "I'm serious. Can I get in and look?" "The water is 52 degrees. "I'd be fast." "No." She sighed and kept looking. Sophia was watching Lily with the expression that had become familiar, the unguarded one, the one she didn't deploy in professional contexts. There was something in it that went beyond affection, something that had accrued over months of accumulated ordinary mornings and difficult evenings, and a Tuesday afternoon on a hospital waiting room chair, and a dinner in a seafood restaurant where a 9-year-old had explained the concept of the bread bowl. The river moved. The afternoon light did what late September afternoon light did on water, made it look like the surface of something that went down much further than it actually did, that contained more than was visible, that had been moving long before any of them were there to watch it, and would keep moving long after. Ethan looked at Sophia. She felt his gaze and turned toward him. There were things he still didn't do easily. The language of this, whatever it was becoming, had never come naturally to him. He was a person who understood his own interior but was not always efficient at the translation. Amelia had known that about him and had found it mildly exasperating and had loved him anyway. And the particular shape of his difficulty with language was one of the things he'd carried into the 3 years of absence, one of the things he'd recognized in himself and been quietly sad about on the days when recognition was what was possible. He was still not efficient at it. But Sophia was looking at him with the directness she always had, and there was something in her face that was asking the question that had been in the room for months, the one neither of them had named directly because naming it carried weight, and both of them understood weight. "I'm not in the same place I was in October," he said. It wasn't elegant. It was the plain shape of what was true, offered plainly. "I know," she said. "I don't have all of it figured out." "I know that too." She paused. "Neither do I, just so we're clear." "What don't you have figured out?" She thought about it. "How to do this without—" She stopped, started again. "My instinct is to manage things. I build structures, systems. I put things where they make sense, and I control the variables I can control." She looked at the river. "You can't do that with something like this. You can't build a structure around it and manage the outcome." She paused. "I find that uncomfortable." "Yeah," he said. "Me too." She looked at him. "But I'm here." "I know." He held her gaze. "Me too." It was not a declaration. It was not a scene. It was 2 people who had been through something hard and complicated together, sitting on a dock in September, saying the plain, honest thing and letting it stand. Lily said, from the end of the dock, "It definitely moved. It's not a fish. Fish don't move like that." "What does it move like?" Sophia asked. Lily considered. Like a lid, like something with a flat side. Could be a piece of metal from the yard, Ethan said. Things migrate to the berth sometimes. Or a treasure, Lily said. Less likely, but possible. Everything's possible. She turned back to the water, satisfied with this. She had her mother's capacity for satisfaction with a reasonable answer. The absence of the need to push everything to a conclusion before it was ready. Sophia's hand found his on the dock railing. Not a gesture that required acknowledgement. Just contact, warm and real, the kind that meant, I'm here and I mean to stay, and we don't have to figure everything out today. He turned his hand over and held hers. What he'd understood in the months since the worst of it, the hearing, Roy's heart, the reinvestigation, the long, slow work of accountability making its way through institutions that moved like water through rock, slowly and without drama, was something he hadn't had a name for when he was in the middle of it. Grief was not a room you left. He knew that now in his bones, the way you knew things after you'd been through them rather than before. You didn't leave it. It became part of the floor plan, part of the way you moved through every space, the slight angle you'd developed to accommodate something that was still there. But the floor plan could be bigger than the grief. Other rooms could exist. New ones, built in the ways that only the years after loss could build things, with the specific knowledge of what mattered and what didn't, with the absence of the illusion that any of it was guaranteed, with the understanding that love was not a protected asset, but a choice made repeatedly in the face of everything that could take it away. He had Lily, who was crouching at the edge of a dock in a yellow jacket, watching for silver things below the surface of a cold river, absolutely convinced that what was down there was worth seeing. He had the yard, the rust and salt and river smell of it, the work of it, the specific solidity of something he'd built with his hands in the worst year when building was the only thing that kept him from being entirely consumed. He had Roy, walking every morning. He had Hargrove, who'd come to sit on the right side of the room. He had Patricia, who'd built the case with him piece by piece. He had the families who'd sent a letter that was in the drawer with Amelia's text messages. He had the trust that carried Amelia's name, that would carry it forward into schools and living rooms, and the particular hard days of children who had lost someone and needed to know they weren't alone in it. And he had Sophia, who had walked into his salvage yard in heels that didn't belong there and walked back in boots and kept coming back, who had stepped around a shell collection, who had sat in a hospital waiting room with coffee from somewhere better, who had said, I'm here without embellishment, and had meant every syllable. The world was not clean. The wrong that had been done to Amelia and the others was not undone, could not be undone, would live in the particular space that injustice occupied when it was acknowledged and named but could not be reversed. He'd made his peace with that, not fully, not permanently, but enough to stand on. What he thought, sitting on a dock with the river moving below and September light going gold around them, was this. The measure of a life was not the absence of damage. It was what you built in the damaged places, what you chose to grow in the ground that the worst things had broken open. Lily had taught him that without knowing she was teaching it. She'd done it by picking up shells and making them into patterns that meant something only to her, by naming a rusted tugboat the Patience and deciding it was furniture, by extending her hand to a near stranger on a nighttime sidewalk, because she'd decided, in the unsentimental pragmatic wisdom of a child, that the person was worth including. He had learned from his daughter the thing that was probably the truest thing he knew, that the human capacity for continuation was not a weakness or a betrayal. It was the whole point. Lily stood up from the edge of the dock. I'm going to need a net, she announced. We have salvage hooks, Ethan said. Close enough? Probably. She looked at him, then at Sophia, with the assessing expression she got when she was taking inventory of a situation. Then she said, with 9-year-old casualness, Sophia, you should come for dinner. We're having soup. Sophia looked at Ethan. He raised an eyebrow. Your call. She looked back at Lily. What kind of soup? Tomato. From the can. Dad makes it with cheese on top. Lily considered this. It's actually pretty good. That does sound pretty good, Sophia said. So you'll come? Yeah, Sophia said. I'll come. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went off down the dock to find a salvage hook, the yellow jacket catching the last of the afternoon light. Sophia was smiling.
Not the controlled professional version. The real one. Tomato soup from the can, she said. It's a signature dish, Ethan said, with cheese on top. Don't knock it. She laughed, the unguarded kind, and stood up from the railing, and they walked off the dock together toward whatever the evening was going to be. The river moved behind them, indifferent and constant. The yard was what it had always been. Imperfect, functional, genuinely his. The sign above the gate caught the last light. He had been here for 3 years. He would be here tomorrow. And tomorrow, he thought, was something. That was enough. More than enough. It was, in the end, the whole thing.